Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Today, you'll hear from a Celtics insider on why the Knicks are Boston's biggest threat.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks. I wanted to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because we are available on all platforms. So be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube, the notifications bell, to ensure you never miss an episode there. Like and comment whenever you can. Leave a 5-star review on iTunes, because it all helps grow the show. But who would you be helping out? I'm Gavin Schall. I've been covering the NBA for a decade, and I'm joined by another vet of the beat. He is John Karalis, the host of Locked On Celtics, credentialed media member, cover them their whole run up to the NBA Finals. And he's about to tell you why the Knicks might be the biggest threat to the Celtics if they can answer a couple of big questions. We get into that all right now on Locked On Knicks. All right, guys, as promised, I am lucky enough to be joined by friend of the show, NBA champion by extension, John Karalis, the host of Locked On Celtics. You see, it's in the background. That is literally his living room. That's what it looks like. John, good to talk to you, buddy. We're going to be doing some Knicks, Celtics, I'll say like big picture questions, because you guys are the big bad in our universe, but you individually are not. So how's it going, man?
I'm sure by the end of this, I individually will. Because that's how it goes with me and other teams' fan bases. But I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. Listen, I'm lucky enough to have covered a champion, and these are great times in Boston. They will not last forever. They might not last for more than a couple of seasons, but for now, I'll take it. And this is going to be fun, because I do see the Knicks as one of Boston's biggest threats in the East.
So I was going to say this for the end, but maybe we can start with it, because you said that to me pre-show, and it kind of got the gears turning in my head. Like, how long do you think the window is here for Boston? Because as we're going to establish, there's a world where Boston, if fully healthy, which is a big question for Steps Porzingis' health in particular, a very big question. There's a world Boston fully healthy might just be better than everyone else. And it might be a situation like those Kevin Durant Warriors teams, like the Lakers in the early 2000s, where Knicks fans don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to think about it. I'm not sure if it's even true, but there might be a world where Boston is just the standard for the next few years. How long do you think that's the case?
I think they've legitimately got 2 more seasons in them. This coming season and the season after, before it becomes untenable, which is what the collective bargaining agreement is designed to do. If they were under the old system, I'd say that this has a potential dynastic run in them, because Tatum and Brown are in their mid-20s. They're entering their primes. They have to figure out Al Horford. He's coming to an end at some point soon. Porzingis' health is always an issue. Drew Holiday is, sneakily like, oh, wait, his career isn't going to last much longer either. So I don't know how much time they would have left. No matter what, they'd have more time than they do now, because they are well over the second apron. They ran it completely back from last season, partly because they won, and why not run it back? Let's see how long you can do this. But also partly because the CBA didn't allow them to do much else. They didn't have any exceptions to bring in a mid-level guy. They didn't have anything else but to bring their own guys back, which they prepared for. They knew this was going to be the case. So that's why Holiday got his extension early. Porzingis got an extension when he was, when they traded for him. They knew this was going to be the case. Incredible forethought by the front office. So they're prepared to get through the next couple of seasons. And I think by doing that, they'll get a chance to look at the true impact of this new CBA, the true impact of the second apron. And then we'll see do they keep both Brown and Tatum and maybe Derek White, and let a bunch of other pieces go and think, okay, this is good enough. The rest of the league has settled into what they're going to be, and Jalen and Jason and Derek White and some other, that's going to be good enough to stay in the mix. And maybe that extends the window. Maybe that's not enough. And maybe they say, we got to trade one of Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum, which probably would mean Jaylen Brown if that was how the financial situation worked out. So that's the conversation after next season. And from a Boston perspective, after maybe a second or a third championship.
Hopefully not. But Brad Stevens is done.
I'm sure you guys hopefully not. But
yeah,
that's the goal here.
Sure, fair enough. Brad Stevens has undeniably done a brilliant job building this team, and it is just the reality that like that means 3 years probably, and the Knicks this summer, I mean, not with the new CBA, but with a very old CBA rule dating back to a very famous Celtic. They felt the brunt of that when Leon Rose did too good of a job in signing Isaiah Hartenstein to too cheap of a contract, and the Knicks lost someone who might have been the difference between competing with the Celtics and not. But we can get into that as we go, as we zoom back to the present. What is the gap, John, in your mind right now between the Celtics and the rest of the East? Because I listened to you on Locked On Pacers last year during the playoffs, and I remember you had a quote in there. I think Tony might have asked you, or it might have even been the round before. It might have been a crossover with Locked On Cavs, and the question was, it was with Chris. Now I'm remembering. It was what would you put the percentage of Boston getting out of the East? And you had it like 90. I was like, all right, well, screw John. Like we could beat him. I was like, you know what? No, we're kind of injured. Like that's honestly like if you put a gun to my head and asked me the real number, maybe I would have said 85, been a little more modest about it, but that was probably pretty close. Obviously, the Knicks are in a much better position with all their players back. Milwaukee somehow getting Gary Trent, even with aging and injury, probably better position this year, certainly when you consider Giannis being hurt at the start of the playoffs. Philadelphia, undeniably deeper, undeniably higher top-end talent. Do you still think that large gap exists? And like, how confident are you that Boston really won't be challenged on their way out of the East this year?
I think there is still a gap. It's not 14 games like it was this past season, which even that I thought the Celtics kind of, aside from Porzingis missing more time than he needed, they were really playing it super safe with him. They didn't suffer any major injuries. They kind of stuck to the plan. They were all bought in, and everything kind of went the way it needed to go. So I expect some things to not go their way. I expect improvement. Obviously, the Knicks getting Bridges, just getting more comfortable with one another. They are going to be a threat. Losing Hartenstein is a big deal, but they're still going to be right there. I think obviously the Sixers are going to be right there, depending on Embiid's health overall. But obviously, Paul George is a major get, and that makes them a bigger threat. Milwaukee, without the coaching drama, they still have Giannis, they still have Dame. They're, if they can address some of those defensive issues, that's I think they could be more of a threat than they were last year. So I do think it's going to be tougher for Boston. So I still do think that there's a gap because when they're playing together the way they can play, the biggest thing for me is they don't have a defensive weakness when they are healthy. There's nobody to attack. Even if you say you're going to put Kristaps Porzingis in pick and rolls, and you're like, okay, that's fine. It's not really the worst thing in the world. You could play a little drop coverage, and you're giving up mid-range shots if that's the case. Yeah. Fine. But I look at the Knicks, I look at Sixers and the Bucks, and I see obvious places that you can attack defensively and forces the other team to be, to get into rotation. And that might mean a 4 or 5 point difference in each quarter, but that still adds up to double-digit wins, right? And the difference is a couple of buckets that you can score here or there, but those couple of buckets add up. And I think that's where the strength of the Celtics really lies. If I sit here and say I think the Celtics are 20 points better than all of these teams, I sound like a jackass. But if I sit there and say I think Boston can score 2 more buckets a quarter because they can attack the right guy and they won't give those up on their end, and they can rebound well and all of that stuff. Okay, that's 4, 8, 16. There's 16 points. A couple of free throws, a couple of three-pointers here or there. You can get to a 20-point game. You can get to a 12-point game. But that's where I think the Celtics are better than everybody else. Little margins here or there, but those add up. And at the end, you're like, oh, man, I thought we were in this game. And it looks like the Celtics were running away with it. That's why I think the Celtics are the top of the NBA.
All right, guys, we'll be back with John in just a sec to tell you why Julius Randle is the ultimate X factor in the Knicks' ability to beat Boston. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts, for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. I think, and it's incredible because the Celtics rolled without him. I think Kristaps is the biggest difference maker in that he forces your rim protector away from the rim, which completely distorts how the Knicks like to play defense. And on the other end of the floor, like, unless like the Pacers can do with Miles Turner, but there's the Bucks to some extent with Brook Lopez, the Knicks, like when I look at the matchup between the two teams, they can't do that to the Celtics. And I was wondering if this offseason, like would the Knicks make it a priority to get one of those guys? It is incredibly difficult to get one of those guys who can shoot, who can protect the rim, who can be multifaceted off the dribble. And then I go back to last offseason, I'm like, all right, why the heck didn't the Knicks go after Kristaps Porzingis when the Celtics somehow got him with 2 first-round picks, a stroke of genius from Brad Stevens? And I wonder if to your point, last year and the ensuing 2 were won in that one move. And I'm not sure, like the Knicks have done pretty much everything right. Losing Isaiah Hartenstein was some really bad luck as a product of them doing things too right almost. But I wonder if that gap can be made up, because when I look at the matchup between the two teams, and to me, like I think the Knicks' window to win there would come down to Jalen Brunson being just clearly the best player in that series, which is really difficult to do when Drew Holiday and Derek White are chasing him around every single minute he's on the floor. But to me, just the difference at center is the biggest thing there. And I think that gets further exacerbated with Mitchell Robinson being in place of Isaiah Hartenstein, who at least brings some of that multifaceted nature, who at least makes you pay for sitting at the rim if you're an opposing big, versus Mitch, who doesn't. And I'm wondering if the Knicks can upgrade that spot in the year. To me, that is the only way they can challenge and maybe even pull off an upset of the Celtics, again, barring injuries.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. And when Porzingis was healthy, man, he makes it impossible. We saw it against Miami, who you try zone, and with Porzingis especially, he cannot play zone. They just demolished, and that's what the Heat do. It's their bread and butter, and the Celtics just rendered it impossible. They could not play zone against Boston, and that's the Porzingis difference. And so he's probably going to be out until, I'm targeting Christmas, trying to read the tea leaves a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit before, maybe it's a little bit after. That gives him a few weeks of getting ramped up. Plus then you get a week off for the All-Star break, kind of reevaluates, tinker with the return and minutes and all of that stuff. They're not too worried. And the thing about the Celtics is, I think they're stepping into that time of their progression where they don't have to be the 1 seed. They don't have to overtax Al Horford to make up for the Porzingis minutes. They can play Tillman and Cornette and Nemish Keita, and they can try going small, and they can do all these other things, and maybe it costs them a few more games here and there. Celtics have been pretty dominant on the road throughout the season and the playoffs. They feel comfortable winning on the road, so if they don't have home court, they feel like they can get it back pretty quickly. And so prioritizing health is going to be a big thing. If they can get Porzingis back, let him progress naturally, then the stuff that you're talking about in the playoffs is what you're going to face. You can't worry about the regular season. So that's another reason why the gap is not going to be what it might have been. But we'll see. Porzingis being there and just forcing the other team to pay attention to him on the perimeter, that's a game changer. That's the absolute game changer. And you're right. If Mitchell Robinson's on you match those minutes. Porzingis is on the floor with Mitchell Robinson, but also Al Horford exists and he can hit and stretch the floor as well. If he at least maintains last year's production, then it gives Boston 48 minutes of a stretch big, which makes things tough. And look, let's flip this around. Does Tom Thibodeau put the Knicks in a position where they can have enough energy to defend Boston? And the Knicks are a good defensive team, but they're going to have to play that absolute best defense of their lives. And if Porzingis is healthy and Robinson or whomever is pulled out further away from the basket, that means a lot of rotation, means a lot of communication. That's a lot of energy. Can the Knicks sustain that level of defensive energy and have anything left on the other end of the floor?
I think it is one of the most fascinating things about Julius Randle coming back is that it is one of the trade-offs as a positive of Julius getting hurt, and there weren't many. Like it was a massive loss, losing a guy who's made 2 All-NBAs in the last 3 years. And I think, including on my own podcast, probably does not get enough respect around the league. One of the few upsides was that they could put 4 good defenders around Jalen Brunson and just say, hey, Jalen, like the offense, that's all on you. And then Jalen just kind of says bet and goes out there and puts up historic numbers and was one of the, for 2 years now has been like flat out like one of the 2 or 3 most productive scorers on planet Earth in the games that matter the most. But defensively, the Knicks got to have his back by saying, hey, Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart, go be chunkyard dog. Muck everything up, fly in for blocks, fly in for steals, fly in for rebounds. Isaiah Hartenstein, like cover everything up. Mitchell Robinson, go lock up Joel Embiid about as well as he's been guarded. And OG Anunoby, like fill in every single gap. And I think he will be key in that scenario because of his ability to cover a guy on the quarter and somehow recover to the rim to swat shots is just incredible. Obviously, in Mikal Bridges, you add someone who is 3 years removed from finishing second in the NBA in Defensive Player of the Year. His defense had a pretty precipitous drop-off as a net. I think at 28, and without any injury at all to speak of, given that he's played every single game in his career, I don't think there has been a fall off in ability. So I can imagine he can still summon that level. And yet there are going to be real questions there because with Julius Randle on the floor, you just have 2 subpar defenders, one in Brunson, who will give you everything he has physically, but at times will just be a little bit overmatched, and one in Julius, who just does not have much of a motor on that end of the floor. And if you ask him to switch one-on-one and Jason Tatum go at him, like he might hold up better than you expect. If you put him in rotation, you're going to see the Celtics getting a lot of open threes, unless he just comes out this year and is a different guy with a different level of commitment. And my questions, is that something you can really learn in your career? Is that something you can learn as you approach age 30? I'm not quite sure. And because of it, I wonder if the way the Knicks are currently built is the best version of their team, and particularly against the Celtics. And you ask about Tom Thibodeau, I think they might have to go small to beat Boston. But if you're putting Julius Randle in that position, that is even more on him defensively, even if the offense looks a little bit better. So there are always going to be trade-offs. To answer the final part of your question, I'm not too worried about them having energy for offense. I just think there's so much talent, so much balance, so much depth. They will be fine on that end of the floor. In terms of energy, spacing-wise, there could be some concerns with the starting line.
So I know I'm burying the lead because I want to get to Bridges, but you led me so perfectly into my question about Julius Randle. Mm-hmm. He's such a huge part of your success, and he's a really good player. He hasn't had the contract extension hasn't gotten done. Mm-hmm. And that means this is essentially a contract year, and contract year Julius Randle is a thing. He plays different. I think both of his All-NBA seasons were contract years. And that's, on one hand, I'm sure the Knicks listeners are like, great, we're going to get a great Julius Randle season. But my question is, does contract year Julius Randle try to do too much for a team that is clearly now Jalen Brunson centric. Brunson is the engine. Everything runs off of him. Can that team and contract year Julius Randle exist the way the Knicks need them to?
All right, guys, we'll be back with John one final time to tell you why, in fact, the Knicks are Boston's biggest threat and some lessons the Knicks can learn from the championship Celtics on their way to potentially winning a championship. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. Of course, it's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 to get a 3-week free trial on NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on the action. I'm looking at game 1 of the season, relevant to this show, Knicks Celtics. The Celtics are 5.5-point favorites. We all know that's not going to happen. So go put some money down on the New York Knicks. Again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Yeah, so it's a real question. I think my co-host Alex Wolf has done a good job noting that there is some thought that Julius has just been more comfortable since Jalen got here. And that almost seems counterintuitive for someone who, like, you look at the season after, like, Julius's breakout in the Knicks, which was 2021. Then the 21-22 was just a disaster on a lot of different levels. A lot of it was not Julius's fault, but you kind of saw in real time, he kind of caved under the pressure of being the #1 guy. And I think that though there have been some rough stretches the last 2 years, mentally he's been in a better place with that not being on his shoulders, because ultimately, like, your ceiling is probably what you saw in 2021 with Julius as your #1 guy. And I think he's smart enough to know the ceiling is a lot higher when he's your #2. And that was sort of reflected after the OG Anunoby trade, where the Knicks put together a month as good as any team in the NBA did last year. They had the best net rating of any team in a single month, tied with the Celtics, who did it in 2 different months. I think it was plus 15.8 per 100 possessions, but Julius played for the most part unselfishly. I think one of the big things with him is he proactive with his passing, or is he just passing to get an assist? But we've seen good signs. You mentioned the contract pressure. That is a variable. And I'm maybe stalling a little bit here because I'm really not sure of the answer. And if he caves into that a little bit and asks for the ball a little bit more and gets a little bit frustrated, there's a 5-game stretch where he's scoring like 18 points instead of 26, 27. But it is just a fact that this team needs his offense, and it does need him to be a big scorer, even with Mikal. And I think Mikal's more comfortable taking a little bit of a step back. OG has been who he is his whole career, which is a 14 to 16 point per game scorer. Dante DiVincenzo, I don't want him to take a step back. It's probably reality that he is going to take a little bit of a step back. So I just don't think Julius will have to sacrifice that much. I think it's the types of shots he takes. I think it's where on the floor he takes those shots and the timing of them. And when Jalen is really cooking, being able to step back. When someone else is really cooking, being able to step back. But I think it's a smaller step back than some people think, because his creation is just absolutely essential to this team hitting their ceiling.
Yeah, I'm so curious about this. It could go beautifully. It
Yeah.
could go wrong. And I think there is the potential for Randle to, when it comes to making the read, do I pass or do I shoot? Because if the extension isn't done, I just question whether he's going to decide to shoot when he should pass. And if he does what you just said, if Brunson doesn't get the ball in a key spot, is it going to cause some frustration? And he has all his Villanova guys in the locker room. And yeah, Randall's his teammate, and I don't know about their relationship, and I'm certainly not trying to sow any kind of like seeds of discontent.
Sure.
But you also, I think it's fair enough to be like, he can lean on his Villanova guys to be like.
And John, you also have to note it's extra weird because Jalen's had 2 postseasons to be the star where Julius barely played. Like, I think that's another element to what you're saying.
Yeah. So that is I think a legitimate question for the Knicks. Yeah. And if that's answered positively for New York, then that makes them a bigger threat to Boston. And that's something that we're looking at from the Boston side. Is there any kind of fissure, a crack, something that the Celtics can pick on? Because what the Celtics will do is, if they see or hear about anything going on, or if they notice, like, man, Randall's been taking some of these shots, we see what Brunson's body language is in the tight game in a playoff series. They're going to make sure that Randall's the guy getting the ball, and they'll just be comfortable. They have guys who can guard Julius Randle, and maybe he goes nuts and looks like he's carrying the Knicks in the fourth quarter, but it's Brunson's not getting the ball. Brunson's not getting the shots. Or then Brunson gets the ball and he forces a shot because he's like, I know I'm not getting it back from Randle when he gets it. So this is going to be my shot now. Those little types of things. I talked about the margins. This is a big Joe Mazzulla talking point, the margins. If any of that leads to 2 ill-advised shots that become misses that the Celtics can get and rebound and go, 4-point swing, 8-point swing in the fourth quarter, that's the difference between a win and a loss. And that's what the Celtics are going to try to look to pick on. So I am very fascinated. If it doesn't come to fruition and the Randall thing works out perfectly, then the Celtics have to look somewhere else. But that's something I'm watching.
I think it's a great point, because we just have not seen Julius in that situation, right? Like, his first playoff series as a Knick against Atlanta, like he failed, and it was partially a failure of the Knicks to surround him with enough talent. Because you go back and look at that starting lineup, and I want to throw up a little bit, right? Like, it was about as little as you could have helped Julius Randle. They helped Julius Randle in that series, and he sucked. And then last year, or 2 years ago, I guess now, he was pretty good against the Cavs once he recovered from a sprained ankle, then immediately turned the other ankle, and then was a disaster against the Heat. So we just haven't seen it. And you wonder in those moments when Brunson, to your point, has been there and done it. Not in the conference finals, not in the finals, but in the first 2 rounds. Like, he has hit highs about as high as anyone in the NBA these last 2 years. Like, would he tolerate Julius taking those shots? And Julius is someone is capable of taking and making tough shots. And to me, the single biggest factor there is, like, can the Knicks find a way to get a stretch 5, or will Tom Thibodeau in the biggest moments lean into small ball? Because then I think you can get Jalen good looks. I think you can get Julius good looks. And I think that balance will solve itself. And I think most of the shots, even against the defense as good as the Celtics, will ultimately be quality. And if not, if Mitchell Robinson's out there, Julius was just a much less efficient player playing with him than with Isaiah Hartenstein. So I think Boston could really prey on that potentially. But where do you rank the Knicks, John, in terms of, like, the biggest threats to the Celtics, at least in the Eastern Conference? I think it's so fascinating because Milwaukee obviously has the history, and Giannis is still probably the single scariest opponent, especially if they're all fully healthy. Philadelphia might have the most top-end talent to challenge Boston. The mental toughness is a different question. I think the Knicks are kind of like in the middle of both those teams. But how does that kind of play out in your mind?
I think Knicks, Celtics, Sixers, Bucks is the top 4 in the East. I don't think anybody. I'm not going out on a limb. I don't think that's everybody's top 4. Indiana can maybe crack it if something goes wrong somewhere, but I think Indiana and Orlando are your 5, 6, and then who cares about the rest? And I think that's general consensus. Where those 4 teams kind of slot, this is where it depends on some of these questions that we're asking. If Boston stays healthy, they do have experience playing without Porzingis. And, the guys that I mentioned aren't exactly world beaters. I'm not going to sit here and say Luke Cornett is a great center, but he works because the Celtics talent is Tatum, Brown, Derek White, Drew Holiday, and Luke Cornett knows how to navigate in that space. And all he needs to do is be effective, rebound, catch a lob here or there, and the Celtics are good. So if they can manage that time, the first couple of months, and the schedule is kind of friendly for Boston, then I think they're I don't think they're going to slip to second or third or fourth. But like I said, I think it's going to be close. And I think if some of these things go the Knicks' way, some of these questions, they could be as high as second. They could be the second seed in the East.
Yeah, I guess, John, I'm getting at more in like a playoff context. Like who do you think, like who are you most
Oh, in the
scared of seeing in the
playoffs?
conference finals? Yeah.
Oh, and you know, I think the Knicks are actually the team I would fear the most. I
You see,
think,
you're making friends, John. You didn't think you'd make any friends on this podcast. Everyone
yeah,
in
there you
college,
go.
he respects us. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, absolutely. Listen, all three of those teams are dangerous. And I'm not trying to minimize, like, I have a sour taste in my mouth about Milwaukee, but they have Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard, and if their coaching stuff works out, obviously they're going to be a threat. If things work out in Philly with Paul George, like that obviously is a serious threat. The Knicks, they play so hard. They are organized. They know what they're doing. And frankly, Jalen Brunson, that playoff run, the way he played last season, kind of reminded me of Isaiah Thomas in Boston, that 2017 era run where he was just, you're like, how is he doing this? And he was an all NBA level player. And you're like, damn, he just, every time you think you have that team beat, he's just there to keep them alive. And you're like, what is happening? Just die already. You know, it's like a zombie. You got to stab him in the head. Like, how do you die? So tons of respect for a player who just finds a way to get those buckets and keep a team alive. So they are a threat. And that emotional, you know, the emotional kind of burst they get from him, and playing in New York is tough. It's a very loud atmosphere, which the Celtics do love and thrive in, but the Knicks get a bunch of adrenaline off of that. So it gives them that boost where they are, I think it's the team I probably would want to play the least. And honestly, if it's Celtics, if you tell me today it's Celtics Knicks guaranteed, I would rather face them in the conference finals than in the first round, because in the first round they'll have all of their energy, they'll have a few days off, they'll be pumped up. At least by the conference finals, I'm banking on Tibbs playing these guys, the wheels falling off, and I always joke about like the Blues Mobile at the end of the movie just completely falling apart, like that type of effect with the Knicks. I would rather play them later and hopefully catch them at their most tired, because I just don't want to deal. I don't want to deal with it. They are annoying in the most respectful way possible.
Yeah, it's I mean, similar to what I assume you said about Miami for years and years, right? It's just like, I felt that way about the Heat this year, even when they were beaten and broken down, and obviously no Jimmy Butler ultimately made that not too difficult for you guys, but it's like you just don't want to deal with it until you have to.
I know we're going long. Give me the Bridges impact before we wrap this up.
I'm incredibly excited to see him on the Knicks. Obviously, it is going to be a great fit. I think it's going to be electric when you get those bench lineups with all four of the Villanova guys together. The theme we have been talking about all offseason is his ability to calibrate the Phoenix version of himself and the Brooklyn version of himself and find the best middle ground. Because as a Sun, he was just very similar to like how Drew Holiday and Derek White have scaled their games on the Celtics. He was the ultimate role player, hyper efficient, an elite defender, a 3-point shooter, and one of the best finishers at the rim. He had a year shooting 70% at the rim as a Sun, and as a Net, like he was asked to be the alpha dog, and for whatever it was, 27 games, like he looked fantastic doing that. And if he had maintained that last year, like the Knicks could have thrown 6 first-round picks out there. Brooklyn wouldn't have budged and said, no, this guy's our future. But it only did last those 26 games last year, far and away the least efficient season of his career, far and away the worst defensive season of his career. And you're just wondering, like, all right, can he find that middle ground? And I think it will take some time because of everything we mentioned with Julius Randle, because OG Anunoby getting that kind of money. I think he's saying, like, hey, the last game I was healthy, I put up 28 points in 2.5 quarters. Yeah. I want to get more shots. Dante DiVincenzo, when everyone was hurt last year, midseason, he had a 6-game stretch where he put up 26 points per game. He could rightfully say, hey, I deserve my shots. I'm already looking forward to my next contract. I could be a 20-point scorer in the right context. And I think ultimately, outside of Julius, like those things are just going to take care of themselves because OG's been pretty egoless his whole career. Obviously, the Villanova guys are known for that, are defined by that. But I'm just curious to see what the fit is going to look like, particularly in the starting lineup where you lose the spacing that Hartenstein gave you. And because Bridges, like this is an ultimate first world problem, you lose the spacing that Dante DiVincenzo gave you. And Bridges is a very good 3-point shooter, 85th percentile or so in the NBA. Elite from the corners, like really, really good. Dante is just a different animal. He finished third in the NBA, made threes last year. You have to guard him 30 feet out. Bridges, you guard him like towing the line, maybe a little bit more than that, but it will affect the geometry of defenses in a negative way for Jalen Brunson, in a negative way for Julius Randle. And go a little bit back to some of the offenses that were ultimately kind of brutally effective for the Knicks, but looked archaic and did not always translate to the playoffs and look like the Knicks, like this is not RJ Barrett, right? Mikal is a different level of player, but I'm curious to see what the spacing is going to look like with him earlier in the year and how Tom Thibodeau finds ways to maximize that.
Yeah. I think he was a great pickup. A lot of people, it sucks that it kind of cost you Hartenstein.
Well, there was I think there was no connection because of the bird rights, right? Like the Knicks could have only paid him the $72 million, even if we didn't get Bridges. So. Yeah.
Okay. So I know people have been connecting the two, but
right. Yeah.
Regardless, I think it's a good pickup. And if the Celtics help the Knicks in any way, you're talking about guys getting shots and demanding their shots. You could very easily look at the Celtics from this past season and the steps back that Tatum and Brown took, the steps forward they took as playmakers. They gave up shots. They gave up some of the things that defined them a little bit, and that helped. And it made for a really well-rounded team that was capable. Like, it didn't matter if Tatum has a bad shooting night. It didn't matter. Tatum couldn't hit a damn thing in the playoffs, and the Celtics marched through the playoffs like nothing, because Derek White had a few monster games, and Holiday had a few monster games, and Porzingis and Jalen, obviously. So there's kind of like a little bit of a blueprint where Thibodeau could be like, hey, there's a lot of guys here that deserve a lot of shots. Look at that team that we're chasing and how those guys gave up their, some of their shots for the betterment of the team. If you want that championship, if you want a parade through Manhattan, one of those classic New York ticker tape parades, your best chance is everybody kind of gives up a little for the betterment of the team, and like you'll make it back in wins, and the rising tide, raises all ships, or however it's said. That's how Boston did it, and they'll still do it. I think there's still a better version of that, but that's where the Knicks will be their absolute best. So yeah, man, I'm looking forward to this. I think the Knicks are going to be really, really good. Even though I think the Celtics are better. A Knicks beating Boston in the playoffs would be an upset, but not like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. It'd be an upset, but not to a grand scale. I think people would be like, yeah. Listen, man, I was at Madison Square Garden last year, and we were talking back then. I was talking to some Knicks people, and we were talking back then about like, hey, this could be the team that you have to fear the most. And the injuries kind of took that away. But I still think the Knicks are a legitimate threat to the Celtics.
Well, John, this was a great exercise in mutual respect. I hope we're having this conversation again in late May, and maybe we get to see that play out. But anyways, he is John Karalis. Be sure to follow Locked On Celtics everywhere you can. If you're a Knicks fan, so we can keep up with the competition all season, know who we have to beat. Hopefully, if you're a Celtics fan, you follow along Locked On Knicks wherever you can get podcasts, and of course on YouTube. We'll both talk to you soon. Locked On Knicks and Locked On Celtics.